Welcome to the purpose of this book with David G and David G. And as we were just celebrating right before we got started tonight, other David G, the good David G, 25 years clean and sober tonight. So, yes, keep it up, bro. Okay. We are we had gotten through the top of 109 last week. We are in the chapter to wives. We'd read alcoholic category type number one, and we'll just read one again because we'll get through, two, three, and four tonight as well. And that way we'll whack them all together and then keep going on into more new content. So I think let's just dive right in, David, if that's good with you. I'll reread that and we'll jump in. Okay. So very, very bottom sentence on 108. I'll read the sentence before that. The problem with which you struggle usually falls within one of four categories. One, your husband may only be a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes he's a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He is positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good member will become true alcoholics after a while. Nothing from Ab. Go ahead, David.
Okay. Yeah. So, we're going to get these descriptions, and Bill gave us earlier descriptions in the book also. He did it on page 20, fifth paragraph, and there's a solution. Last paragraph on that page when we just talk about, so he gives a description of three types of drinkers, and there's a solution. And last one on page 20 and 6 is then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair himself physically and mentally. So, and then it says, in other words, he has the allergy and he has the obsession of the mind, and may cause him to die a few years before his time. If sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate. Okay, so something to consider, something to think for myself. If I can do that, so once I put drink in my body, can I manage the amount that I drink, or whatever your drug of no choice is? And once I stop, can I stay stopped? Permanent sobriety, because then it says becomes operative. This man can also stop and moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome. He may even need medical attention. So again, is this enough? This sufficient reason to stay sober? Knowing this information, can I stay sober on my own power? And my answer is no. So, and then if we go to page 109, back to the text that David's reading here today, halfway through the paragraph, it says it may be slowing him up mentally and physically, which is reinforcing what Bill just wrote back. And there's a solution, but he does not see it. So sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and your friends. I identify with all these things, right? This is part of my drinking career. He is a positive. He can handle his liquor, which is denial. Just a spoiler alert. The word denial is not in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just my note, denial. And then he says that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessarily necessary in his business. That would be delusional. That would certainly be delusional to think that I need to do this because that's what we do in business. Listen, I have my own business. David has his own business. I do not have to drink. It's never even an option. Doesn't even come up. It says he would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. So we're going to hurt his little feelings. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate and stop altogether, and some will not. So can-nots and will-nots even kind of relates to that a little bit and how it works. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. So Bill also references back on page 34 in the first paragraph, and I won't read that whole paragraph, but he uses the word halfway through that paragraph. It says, though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. So it's just another reference that you're potential alcoholic. In other words, am I having problems with drinking once I start? Can I stop on my own power? And once I stop, can I stay stopped, permanently stay stopped? And my answer is absolutely not. And then there's another reference on page 39 in the first paragraph. And I will read that paragraph. That may be true for certain non-alcoholic people who, through drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate. So those people can, not alcoholics, because their brains and their bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual potential alcoholic will hardly, an exception, will be, and here's the squiggly writing, absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize, and then Bill says re-emphasize, to smash a home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration, and then we get to go into Fred's story. So Bill's just emphasizing, re-emphasizing. He's pointing out the first drinker, and then we're going to go out to the second drinker, third drinker, and fourth drinker tonight.
Awesome. All right. Since we covered that last week and this week, we'll take your recap there, and I'll keep us plowing forward here. So on to new content now. Now we're up to category 2. So first full paragraph on 109. 2, your husband is showing lack of control, for he is unable to stay on the water wagon even when he wants to. He often gets entirely out of hand when drinking. He admits this is true, but is positive that he will do better. He's begun to try, with or without your cooperation, various means of moderating or staying dry. Maybe he's beginning to lose his friends. His business may suffer somewhat. He's worried at times and is becoming aware that he cannot drink like other people. He sometimes drinks in the morning and through the day also to hold his nervousness in check. He's remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you he wants to stop. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately next time. We think this person is in danger. These are the earmarks of a real alcoholic. Perhaps he can still tend to business fairly well. He has by no means ruined everything. As we say among ourselves, he wants to want to stop.
I have a couple here. Water wagon being not drinking alcoholic drinks. Bouts are a period of time, and earmarks are indications identifying marks or features.
You want to go? You want me to go? I'm going to go briefly here, just because I'm just going to use this paragraph as a checkbox exercise or a checklist. So again, like when we read Bill's story, the first 8 pages, or when I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, or whatever anonymous that I'm going to, I'm looking for similarities and not differences. Did I drink, think, or feel like that person? So I'm not looking for the differences, like, oh, I didn't go to prison, I didn't get divorced 4 or 5 times, I didn't lose this job or that. That's not what makes me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is, once I start to drink, can I manage and control, or do I break out in craving? And once I stop, can I stay stopped? And do I suffer and live through the abuses of page 52, the bedevilments? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. So these are just checkbox exercises to me. And the only thing I want to do is relate it to one other page on the bottom, the last sentence in italic, right in that paragraph. He wants to want to stop. Anyone made those solemn vows to themselves and had that? David does this great example when we're at treatment centers about looking in the mirror and go in the third person, talking to myself, dude, you're stronger than this. You're smarter than this. You got to stop doing this. Like, I cannot wake up and go on in life anymore. I got to stop drinking. Knock it off. Anyone else do that when you're out in real alcohol? Absolutely. So, and the last thing, so if we want to look at a real alcoholic on page 21, in the first paragraph, so we flip back to the solution again to finish up what Bill's going to describe as the real alcoholic, and it relates completely to that paragraph. It says, but what about the real alcoholic? He may start out as a moderate drinker, check. He may be or may not become a continuous hard drinker, check, check. But at some stage of his drinking career, I love that we have drinking careers. Oh my God. I have a career today. It doesn't look nothing like my drinking career did. Nothing like that. But he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Once I start to drink, what happens to me? I break out in craving. That's what he's relating there, that part of the story. So that's all I got there, David.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so I think what's nice about this little, let's just talk about the context again, where we are. We're in the chapter to wives. The intent of this chapter originally was, it was supposed to be written by the wife of someone recovering in Alcoholics Anonymous. We know Bill wrote this. Lois wanted to write it. He wouldn't let her. So he wrote it himself. So it's supposed to be, this particular span here, these four categories is for the wife or the spouse to kind of evaluate the progression of their alcoholic spouse. Where are they in the continuum of being? I described these four as the mild, moderate, severe, and profound alcoholic. So we read them, and those are just what I heard somewhere. It's not in literature, but type 1 we can call the mild, and type 2 is the moderate here. So we're seeing this progression. And what I was also going to say is that this particular paragraph about category number 2, as David pointed out, these are a lot of references back to ideas that have been already introduced in the book. What does it look like when we're talking about lack of control? What does it mean unable to stay on the water wagon even when he wants to? If we think about it, the first story that we get, Bill's story starting on page 1, this very much we see this exact progression. We see all of these progressions for all four categories in Bill's story, but some of the descriptions in this particular paragraph jump out at me. And I think we can all relate to a number of the things, as David pointed out as well, that we have all pretty much lived through this. Everyone who's probably in this room, irrespective of your powerlessness, had this experience where stuff started to go sideways on us because of the powerlessness, right, over whatever the substance or the process addiction was that we had, and we started to get remorseful, and we started making sweet promises, and we were constantly saying how we were going to get better. And then late in the paragraph, it talks about he's remorseful after serious drinking bouts and tells you he wants to stop. But when he gets over the spree, he begins to think once more how he can drink moderately next time, right? That is, again, that textbook mental obsession, the mental powerlessness that I absolutely cannot differentiate the true from the false, no matter how injurious things were. And sometimes in my experience, guys, as I was still shaken out of my last debauch, out of my last binge, I had already changed my mind. I remember a time in my early 20s, I had been up partying, and I was getting really out of control with cocaine, and I was driving up to see my family, and I'd been up all night, or maybe for a couple of days, I don't know, and the whole ride up, I'm like, I'm going to tell my parents, I'm going to tell my parents, I'm going to tell my parents, I'm going to ask for help. And I was so convinced I was going to get the help I needed. I was 22, 23 at the time. And when I pulled into the parking lot, and I was like, I'm not going to tell them a damn thing, right? Because again, I was sort of over the worst of it at that point. And I'm like, it's not that bad. I'll be okay. I'll grow out of this. Or like David said, I talk about this all the time. I would outthink, outmuscle, maybe occasionally outrun any problem. So why couldn't I do that to this problem? Why couldn't I do that with the drugs? Right? Because I didn't understand yet that I was in a losing battle.
Yeah, and Bill even talks about, and this covers the last two descriptions there, the first and the second one. But Bill, back on page 2, in Bill's story, in the first paragraph, I was looking this up today because it rang a bell with me. So if we go almost to the bottom of that paragraph here, this is Bill being delusional. And these are how my emotions were, and what David just said here. Delusional feelings that I'll be okay. Like, it's not as bad as it was. I'm feeling a little bit better now. So page 2, Bill's story, in the grips of this progressive disease that we have, Bill says, halfway down the paragraph, it starts at one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous to disturb my wife, we had long talks. I was still her foreboding by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk. Does anyone buy that? Anyone here? Come on. I would say my first 2 drinks, like my father, I was center stage at the bar. But after that, the craving kicked in, and it was all bets are off. And I was in the bathroom with strangers, someone else's house for the rest of the night, and in blackout most of the night. That was my experience with that. But anyways, I just liked relating those things. I love looking back at Bill's story. I love last week we went back to the quicksand surrounding all around us. Good description of a bottom. This is delusional, and I need to look at the delusion that I believe the lie. Delusion is believing a lie.
Let me just do one more callback to this too. The very bottom, so on 109 at the end of that category number 2, the last sentence. as we say among ourselves, he wants to want to stop. I'm not sure we say that a lot. I'm not sure in the meetings that I say that a lot, and I'm going to really think about that. And as I read that, I don't know how many people I meet that come stumbling into meetings really want to stop. I think they're scared, they're confused. Somebody told them go to one of those AA, CA, NA, whatever it is. You need help. Go do this thing, or they're compelled in by the courts or something. And I'm not sure they want to stop. Some people, but Bill makes it sound like this was a very sort of common assessment they made. And I'm going to know. I'm going to be sort of aware to this concept, I think, a little bit more, having reread that tonight.
Yeah, and let me piggyback on top of that. So I got introduced to Cocaine Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous in like 1992. So for the people who showed up late, I'm gonna grandstand here for a minute. Today is my 25th sober date, so 25 years, November 13th, 1999. Okay, there's a six-year window that was closing very fast on me, but I was introduced to a very healthy, well organized. I know we should not be organized. Well organized 12-step program. Really is what it is. I was introduced to it. Did I want anything to do it? I didn't really want to stop. But when I hit my bottom, and my bottom was a feeling, my bottom was this, that this is my life. I don't know how I knew this, because I believe God froze the liar in me long enough to see the truth. He said, I just knew this is my life and it's never going to get any better than this. And that's when I asked you for help. I wanted to stop, but I knew I had no power, no choice, no control. I can't tell you how I knew that, other than the fact that maybe those meetings that I was going to, that I didn't die before I got here, allowed me to hear the things necessary for me to hear. I'm not promoting relapsing. I'm just saying I kept coming back. The key for me to say today is don't stop coming back. No matter what, stay here, stay, and do this work. My life looks unbelievably amazing today compared to what it was 25 years ago.
Okay, bottom of 109, category 3. So 3. This husband has gone much further than husband number 2. The ones like number 2, he became worse. His friends have slipped away. His home is a near wreck, and he cannot hold a position. Maybe the doctor's been called in, and the weary round of sanitariums, treatment centers, and hospitals has begun. He admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. He may have come to the point where he desperately wants to stop but cannot. His case presents additional questions which we shall try to answer for you. You can be quite hopeful of a situation like this.
Nothing, Eddie? I lost you. Okay. Yeah, so this is progression. Again, this is my story, checkbox exercise for me. But the part of the sentence that I underline here, he says, he admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. He does not understand the threefold illness here. He does not understand it whatsoever. And the book calls it an illness. Doesn't really call it a disease. But I know it is a disease today because of the dis-ease and the discomfort that I have in my life is going to send me back to a drink or drug, which is the unmanageability in my life, which is the spiritual malady, which is things on page 52 and the bottom of 28 in the Roman numerals and many other places in the book, page 60 through 63, where I have my troubles are my own making. So all these things here is I need to learn. And if the best way for me to be a qualifying statement in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is to go back to page 44 in the first paragraph, right in the chapter We Agnostics, right away it gives us, it says in the preceding chapters, you have learned something about alcoholism. Well, I sure hope so. I surely do hope so, that we've studied this book up to this point. So I have learned something about alcoholism. It says we hope that we have made a clear distinction, and I know they have, because I relate to it wholly today, between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And here's the questions. So we take statements, we turn them into questions in this meeting. If when you honestly want to, David, do you find you cannot quit entirely? Or is a bit of a drunk trap? Or if when drinking, you have a little control of the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. Here's the caveat. This is the part that people seem to leave out. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness Remember, I told you it's an illness in the book, not yet described as a disease yet by MDA, which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Only a spiritual experience. Have I tried other ways to try to stay sober on my own power through human aid? Yes. And was they successful? No, not at all. This is what we have to offer here. This is spiritual experience through the workings of the 12 steps out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're muted, David.
Sorry, gang. A couple of the main takeaways I have here is the way David introduced this this description. It's another checklist, right? So again, this is a chapter to the wife or to the spouse, but again, it's another opportunity for us to look at as a checklist, maybe when working with a newcomer and qualifying them. Have you had this experience, or is this what's going on in your life, that you've lost your friends and you can't keep a job, and oh, you've been hospitalized. Oh, you've been hospitalized many times. You know, these kinds of things. And he admits he cannot drink like other people, but does not see why. Well, I would be very impressed. I'm still waiting for the day, 20 plus years, for someone to show up at a meeting and explain to me that they already understand the powerlessness, right? We don't understand this. We are absolutely perplexed why we make the decisions that we do. We come to find out later we weren't making decisions at all, right? That we were powerless, no power, no choice, no control in this matter. And he clings to the notion that he will yet find a way to do so. I mentioned it already. I just thought I was going to outgrow this. That just one day it wasn't going to be a problem. But I think the most important sentence in this paragraph is the last one. You can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. I mean, just so we've got started with, alcoholic husband 1, and then worse number 2, and then number 3 is even worse. And it's all these sort of terrible things happening. And then it says, you can be quite hopeful of a situation like this. Well, why should we be hopeful of a situation like this? Who are the people who most effectively start to work the program to get well? They are the people who are battered and beaten and beyond bruised, right? The reason why this is hopeful is that the more beat up and beat down and powerless and hopeless somebody is, the greater chance that they're going to say, I can't do this on my own. Yes, David, please help me take these steps. I'm up for it. If things haven't been so bad, maybe they haven't progressed to this point, then I think that's just going to reinforce that maybe I'm making too big a deal out of this. That I bet when I go out again tonight, I'll just have the 2 drinks tonight. I know last night was tough, but tonight's going to be better. So this is why we should be hopeful of the situations like this when things are looking desperate beyond the pale. Alcoholic husband, spouse, category 4. You may have a husband of whom you completely despair. He has been placed in one institution after another. He is violent or appears definitely insane when drunk. Sometimes he drinks on the way home from the hospital. Perhaps he's had delirium tremens. Doctors may shake their heads and advise you to have him committed. Maybe you've already been obliged to put him away. This picture may not be as dark as it looks. Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well.
I have despair, which is have lost all hope or confidence, and delirium tremens, which are violent delirium with trembling caused by excessive and prolonged alcohol use.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. Yeah, so David used the word desperation. Abby just gave us the definition of despair. So for me, willingness comes from those things. And Bill's and there's a solution. If we go back to page 28 in the second paragraph, we're going to talk about what this desperation does when it looks like Bill's great descriptions. And he gives so many great descriptions throughout the book of what bottoms look like, what healthiness looks like, what a relationship with power looks like. But in the second paragraph, it says we. So I circled the word we there because, that is what the first 100 we're talking about. In our turn, sought the same escape with all the desperation of a drowning man. If I am a drowning man, am I going to be particular on what color life preserver you throw me or what color the rope is? I am absolutely not. I am taking whatever rope or life preserver color you throw me. And then what seemed to be at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given to us, or if you prefer, a design for living that really works. That is a great promise. If you do this work, this is the result that you're going to get. So I just like, yeah, I farther down the scale you've gone. Which one of these 4 categories has the best chance of getting sober and staying sober? I'm more 4. I'm all about 4. They all could get sober, right? But man, if I'm of desperation, if I'm out of options, and we stress this when we go to treatment centers, if you have a plan, do not use your plan and how you're going to stay sober. Share your plan with us. And there's a great speaker who was passed on years ago. His name was Scott Redmond. He goes, "Wouldn't it be a great book if newcomers wrote plans for how to stay sober? Wouldn't it be just a hilarious book to read?" Because it's just actually ridiculous that I tried all these options and none of them worked here. I needed a spiritual experience, as I read earlier on. But the last sentence in that paragraph, because the doctors were shaking their heads, my brother died directly from alcoholism. He died 6 or 7 years ago, he drank himself to death. The doctors had told him, "You're going to die." He would put together a week, 2 weeks. That's the best that he could do on his own power. And he would drink again. He died directly from alcoholism. The last sentence there says, "Many of our husbands were just as far gone, yet they got well." They got well means recovered. Again, it means recovered. I've recovered from a hopeless state of mind and body. I do not have the obsession, and I certainly can't have the allergy. I cannot break out in craving if I don't pick up a drink. That's the grace of God. But the grace of God has a timestamp on it. I don't know how long this timestamp is. I can tell you right now, I am responsible for the legwork here in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, or whatever anonymous I'm in. I need to continue to do this work, meaning being recovered means that I live in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12 all day long. I had a pretty nice conversation with my sponsor today, and it's always nice to hear the thing. God shows, is it odd or is it God? Like, I needed God right in that moment. And I can give you a couple instances where God showed up. Like, it seems so like it couldn't have happened any other way. Like, I was walking into a situation that was very uncomfortable for me with a family member, and someone in the program immediately texted me and tried to call me, and I haven't talked to this person on the phone or through a text, and I can't even tell you. I mean, immediately. And then again today, the same situation happened. Then my sponsor called me today to wish me, and I said, "Dude, there's another purpose that you're wishing me a happy anniversary. I really need to share with you right now." So I've recovered, because what it ended up doing for me in that moment is bringing me back to the we, bringing me back that I'm not alone anymore in any situation, because there's 3 sides of this triangle. Yes, I've recovered and I work all 12 steps of my life. Yes, I do a lot of service in Alcoholics Anonymous, but sometimes I leave out that unity part where I include you, because I desperately need you. I need God, and I need this 12-step program. But boy, as soon as I got off the phone, as soon as I read those texts and talked to them people today, I felt apart again. And I started to feel apart from. I really was on my own power. How long does that last in my life? Not long enough. So I don't ever want to drink. I don't ever want to go through this checkbox exercise that we're talking about here. And maybe that's not the right terminology to use necessarily, but I relate to it all. I just don't live like that anymore. And that is the grace of God. Again, my responsibility to continue to do this work.
Well, I think that was nicely said. I'm not sure I have anything to add. So let's move on, which is now going to sort of look back at these 4 and consider them a little bit. So we're on 110, bottom paragraph. Let's now go back to husband number 1. Oddly enough, well, not so odd, I think, for those who have studied this book and who've been around a little while, right? But oddly enough, he is often difficult to deal with. So the sort of mild alcoholic, maybe the least progressed alcoholic, he enjoys drinking. It stirs his imagination. His friends feel closer over a highball. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. You've passed happy evenings together, chatting and drinking before your fire. Perhaps you both like parties which would be dull without liquor. We've enjoyed such evenings ourselves. We had a good time. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has its advantages when reasonably used. Ab, anything?
Yeah, I just have highball, which is a mixed drink containing alcohol served in a tall glass.
Thank you.
Oh,
Okay. I didn't know
yeah,
what the highball was.
I didn't either. I had no
You know,
idea.
I'll just sort of point out, and David already took us back here, but I had a reference note going back to page 2, and I had Bill's BS, and that's really what Bill was spewing on page 2 to Lois, like, oh, all these brilliant thinkers historically, these intellectuals, these philosophers, we come up, I'm sure he spoke like this in that first person plural. We come up with our brilliant ideas when we're in our
Hmm.
cups, when we're having, in vino veritas, the truth of the wine. But that's what this paragraph here is sort of suggesting, right? And the husband, the spouse is selling how it liquor is good for me. It makes us feel good. It stirs its imagination. We're having a good time. We're feeling intimate. All of these things, chattering and drinking before the fire, and recognizing perhaps you both like parties which would be dull without liquor. So a little bit of the codependency. I mean, how can we have a good time if we're not drinking, right? Sucking our spouses into that. We know all about liquor as a social lubricant. And some, but not all of us, think it has its advantages when reasonably used. And again, this is Bill talking as the spouse, as the wife, trying to appeal to these other ones and saying, it's another opportunity. We've been where you are. We understand it. We understand this way of thinking. But then he's going to transition, as you'll see in the next paragraph, to a little bit more reality, right? He's going to advance beyond this way of thinking.
Yeah, that's I was husband, or I'm number one, and I did this quite often. And it talked about it halfway through the paragraph. Perhaps you enjoy drinking with him yourself when he doesn't go too far. I believe my wife would probably, support that back in the day. Very briefly, though, guys, I'm going to say I would say by the time I married her, within about a week after that, all bets are off. Honestly, God, I swear to God, that's the kind of alcoholic I was. I was so dishonest and delusional that I think I took her hostage and I married her and she bought into it. And then I was just this drunk part of her life. But there for a while, we had great times together. But the problem is read out in that paragraph, we've enjoyed such evening ourselves. We had good time. We know all about the liquor as a social lubricant. Some, but not all of us, think it has its advantage when reasonably used. So I know a lot of people who can drink reasonably. And once in a while, they tie one on, and they probably won't do it for a very long time. Am I that kind of a drinker? Absolutely not. These are also things that I consider as I study the big book. David and I are real big about asking people to consider instead of like making rash decisions or immediately answering the question. Like consider it. Yeah, it was a good time, but I'm not going to be able to recall the pain of a week or a day or a month ago, a day, a week or a
Sure.
month ago. That's not going to happen to me. I can't do that on my own power. There'll be times where I can't do that. So I have to be relying on a power greater than myself. And the whole point of the steps for me is to build a relationship so I have access to that power. I don't ever want to take a drink again. And oh, by the way, good news for all of us. I never have to. None of us do. We can have permanent sobriety. There are some musts, about 141 of them in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as we studied them. But I do them with great pleasure today to my best ability. And oh, by the way, last thing, the best ability that I had, I could never work these steps. Each step is chained together, linked together. And God gave me the ability to do one after one into two, two into three, three into four. So if I would have came in and did four right away, I wouldn't have done it correctly. I'm not saying there's a right way or wrong way to do a four step. As long as I do one, I think it's healthy enough. We can always do a better one later. But the thing is, I didn't have the power to go out and make amends in 9 right away. They're linked together in a specific order for a reason. And I believe God gives me the ability to do them as I work the steps, each and every one of them. Go ahead, David.
Okay. Top of 111. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. All right, I'm just going to pause right here again. We brought this up at other spots previous in this chapter. Bill, a little self-serving, writing as the wife here, right? There's some tall asks here, and this is a big one. The first principle of success is that you should never be angry. Just going to pause here for a second. Even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. Patience and good temper are most necessary. Yep.
I have rancor, which is anger, hostility, or resentment.
There's also the creature in Jabba's palace underneath the floors in Return of the Jedi, if any of you guys remember that, the Rancor. Okay, but I don't think that's what Bill was talking about in 1939. So yeah, so the first principle of success is that you should never be angry. So what is this whole chapter taking great pains to introduce and to substantiate, and it carries into the family afterward chapter as well, that our whole family gets as sick as us. Everybody gets spiritually sick, spiritually bereft, spiritually destitute. So this suggestion that, the people around us who are just as sick as we are in their own way should never be angry. Not only does it feel like a hard ask, it feels like almost a categorical impossibility, and all due respect to whatever Bill was trying to do here, that's just a lot to ask of our family. So even though our husband or spouses become unbearable and you have to leave them temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. I guess I would like to say if someone is able to do this in the light of their alcoholic spouse, they are probably so very spiritually fit, already. They may not even need this book or this chapter. Patience and good temper are most necessary. And again, this reminds me of back in the 9th step, where there's a couple times where, and I'll find it while David's talking about it, but it suggests we can be successful in these amends if our manner is open, frank, and honest. I may have butchered that a little bit. So it's the same thing here. Bill's saying, hey, wives, hey, spouses of the alcoholic, just be patient. Don't be angry. Leave on good terms. Take good temper in the light of all this horror. It's a tough plot.
Yeah, and I'm only gonna give one saying that I learned from Al-Anon at a couple of meetings I went to, and it says that Al-Anon, you can get well despite if he stops drinking or not. You can get well no matter what. So, but let's look at this paragraph. So this is what we're talking about earlier on when we started this chapter. Like, let's flip the script on this thing and quit taking direction from Bill on what my wife seems to need to do. Let's look at this thing as principles of success for me as the alcoholic. Let's read this text a little bit differently here. And we'll point out these principles as we go along the way. And the very first principle right there in the first paragraph says, is my first principle of success is that I should never be angry. I'm going to change the wording. I should never be angry, because anger comes after agitation. And if I didn't pause, I'm going to get angry. I'm going to get doubtful. And I need to know that. So this is the thing that I'm looking at here is a principle of success will be. And even though your husband becomes unbearable and you have to leave him temporarily, you should, if you can, go without rancor. Second principle of success in that paragraph is the last sentence in that first. Patience and good temper are most necessary. These are things that I should be focusing on here. I should be focusing on. My wife does not need to change anything for me to get well. Not at all. And David pointed it out at the very end there. It's just like, she doesn't necessarily need a spiritual experience whatsoever. I think through the relationship that I have with God, she's been very interested and has a relationship with a higher power different than she ever did before. And she does her own work in that category. I am one thing that my wife says to me all the time: don't sponsor our kids and don't sponsor me. It's like, okay, gotcha. Check. I won't do that. So I don't do that. But let's read this chapter a little bit differently so I can learn what these principles of success is, so I can have more tolerance. I can have more compassion. I can have more patience. I can have more forgiveness. I can have more humility, goodwill, and love for my fellow man. That's all I got there.
Okay, let's continue. Here's some more asks by Bill posing as Lois. Our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. If he gets the idea that you are a nag or a killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be zero. He will use that as an excuse to drink more. He will tell you he is misunderstood. This may lead to lonely evenings for you. He may seek someone else to console him, not always another man. Not that I am. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and so here's another spiritual principle, right in the first sentence, and I don't mean to rewrite the big book because there's nothing need to be rewritten here, and I couldn't have done even a sentence in this book that would have helped anyone here. But our next thought is that you should never tell him what he must do, and I'm just going to put a period there. So my relationship with my ex-wife of 35 years ago when we got divorced, and when I got sober at 25 years ago, when I went to make an amends to her, my sponsors knew the whole story. And I went to her and I said, here's all the harms that I did to you. And are there any other ones that I'm not aware of? And how can I make them right? And I listened for 45 minutes. And then she said, here's what you need to do. Never, ever tell me what to do again. Boy, that rang right between my ears. Never, ever tell her, you know what? And I've been able to honor that. We have a okay relationship. There's really my other daughter. I have a daughter with her, and I have a granddaughter too that she's the grandmother of. But we don't really communicate any longer. But there's a time that we did a lot because our kids were younger. I stopped telling her what to do. This is the spiritual principle, the principle of success. If I'm gonna have a relationship, and I don't ever tell my wife what to do either. She does not need me to give her direction. My wife is a mature adult who makes really good decisions, better ones than I do. That's why I have a sponsor. Why? Because I need not to be walking around unattended. That's why. That's it.
Okay. Paragraph number 3.
Yes.
Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. It is possible to have a full and useful life though your husband continues to drink. We know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. You may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try.
Nothing. Okay. So again, these are principles of success here. Read the paragraph. It says, be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relationship with your children or your friends. They need your companionship and your help. Here's the principle of success. It is possible to have a full and useful life. If I'm a recovered alcoholic, this is the experience that I get to have. It really is. And because I'm not impeding upon them my untreated alcoholism, they also get to have a full and useful life. That's what life looks like for me anyways, and I think for my wife also. Though your husband continues to drink, we know women who are unafraid, even happy under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband. I need not to reform my wife. I need not to reform another human being. I do sponsor people, and we are working to reform the condition, which is called untreated alcoholism, by working these steps so they can have a spiritual experience and then get to have that full and useful life. But that's another spiritual principle there is to have a full and useful life and not to set my heart out on reforming anyone else.
I'm just noticing at these last couple of paragraphs here, the way in which Bill he's sort of laying out these warnings to the spouse about being careful with how they interact with us. So, just going back to the last paragraph, our next thought is you should never tell him what he must do about his drinking. And then it feels like, or else, right? Or else he might he will, if he gets the idea you are a nag or killjoy, your chance of accomplishing anything useful may be 0. That's sort of the or else. He will use that as an excuse to drink more, right? Or else he will tell you he's misunderstood. Or else this may lead to lonely evenings for you. Or else he may seek someone else to console him. Or else not always another man. And then kind of carries into the next one. Be determined that your husband's drinking is not going to spoil your relations with your children or your friends. Or else, sort of implicitly, they may be alienated of your companionship and your help. It's possible to have a full and useful life though your husband continues to drink. Again, we talked about this already. We can all get healthy. The people around us who've gotten sick can get healthy even if we don't. And remember in, earlier in the chapter, right? Wife or no wife, job or no job, as the alcoholics, we can get healthy as well. We're no women who are unafraid, even happy under under these conditions. Do not set your heart on reforming your husband, right? Again, just sort of an implicit or else you may be unable to do so no matter how hard you try. But why? Why are our spouses unable to help no matter how hard they try?
Mm.
Goes back to the doctor's opinion. We're beyond human reliance, right? It's failed us. People that love us, the people that we love, just can't get us sober. Moving on. We know these suggestions are sometimes difficult to follow, but you will save many a heartbreak if you can succeed in observing them. Your husband may come to appreciate your reasonableness and patience. This may lay the groundwork for a friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Try to have him bring up the subject himself. Be sure you are not critical during such a discussion. Attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical.
So there's a lot of principles of success in this paragraph. So the first one here is being reasonable and patient. That's halfway down to the paragraph. These are things that I should be looking at in myself, being reasonable and patient. And then this says, this may lay the groundwork for friendly talk about his alcoholic problem. Then it says, try to have him bring up the subject himself. And here's what I need to do. Be sure you're not critical. I need not to be critical in any relationship, period, the end. I am not anyone's judge. I don't need to behave like that. And then it talks about something that I can do when if I want to relate to somebody, this is the best way to do it. And again, we're looking for similarities, not differences. But it says, during such a discussion, attempt instead to put yourself in his place. I need to put myself in their place without judgment. Consider what I'm doing in this relationship right now, just to put myself in that other person's place. And the last thing is, so it says, let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. That is a new spin on life for me. I got to stop being critical of other people. I don't argue anymore. I stop fault finding any longer, and I can have a disagreement, but I need not to be arguing or fault finding any longer. That's what I see here, and I relate to that. So I'm looking at those spiritual principles: reasonable and patient. Be sure not to be critical. Put yourself in their place. Be helpful rather than critical.
Yeah, there's some parallels here. Again, going back to what we're being instructed here, we're going back into working with others. There's a lot of parallels here back to what's on page 90. So what Bill as Lois is telling the spouses here on 111 is just talking about, listen, we know we're asking you to do a lot of tough things. You're going to be angry, but if you are able to, take this approach, then you're more likely to have some success in, sort of fostering a solution together. And he culminates that with attempt instead to put yourself in his place. Let him see that you want to be helpful rather than critical. And this parallels back on page 90, if you look down in really beginning, and I don't need to read it all to you guys, but paragraphs 2 and 3 talk about the opportunistic ways in which we go to try to talk, a recovered alcoholic to an alcoholic, right? So if we get the word that they want to get better and somebody brings them to us, then we're to go to them and start to work with them. Third paragraph down, sometimes it's wise to wait until he goes on the binge. It's all of these conditions. It's almost like a little flow chart that says when someone is troubled and when we're trying to be of help, here is the method that we use to try to approach them so that we can most effectively get a response. Right? So parallel, whether we're working with the alcoholic to alcoholic, or whether we're the loving spouse trying to help, our husband or wife. Very bottom of 111. Final sentence. When a discussion does arise, you might suggest he read this book or at least the chapter on alcoholism. Tell him you've been worried, though perhaps needlessly. You think he ought to know the subject better, as everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Say you do not want to be a wet blanket, that you only want him to take care of his health. Thus, you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism.
I just have wet blanket, which is one that discourages or dampens enjoyment or enthusiasm.
So to the top of page 112, that David flipped us over to, says read this book. Well, I'm going to change the title. I'm going to change study this book. I think it's important to know this is a textbook. It's not a novel. If I have a nice John Grisham novel, I give it to Janice and say, hey, you're going to really love this novel. Please read it. And she'll read it once, just like I did, and then pass it on to one of her friends, and that's it. But this is a textbook, just like when my kids went to school, went to college, and they studied the textbook. And when they didn't understand what's in the textbook, they got themselves what they call a tutor. We call that person a sponsor. So someone a big book sponsor, can take me through this work. So, and then is even given us an opportunity to cheat a little bit, because it says read this book, or at least a chapter of alcoholism. Well, it's a really good chapter, don't get me wrong, but I would suggest that you read everything up to that point. But that's a good chapter. That you want to find out more about alcoholism, go to the chapter more about alcoholism. Tell him you have been worried, though perhaps needlessly, when you think he ought to know the subject better. So again, I will know the subject better if I read that chapter. Everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. Show him you have confidence. Back to page 35 and more about alcoholism. As long as they're telling me to pick out that chapter, I'm going to read it. Third paragraph. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answers we had found. Answers, definite answers. He made a beginning. That means that he did steps 1 and 2, but he didn't do step 3. He didn't turn his will and his life over. So he just made a beginning. His family was reassembled. Outside circumstances got a little bit better. Remember, this is an internal illness, not an external illness. Well, it is because it is an internal one. He began to work as a salesman for the business he lost through drinking. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He didn't do steps 4 through 9. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him. I never, ever lose sight of the first step for me. I understand the first step. Then power over alcohol, cocaine, all of my altering substances, whatever your drug of no choices. I never give up on the newcomer. Never, ever, ever, because I know the truth in the first step here. And we agreed, it says, on each of these occasions, we work with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. So yeah, I sit down. We read this and working with others. Have a long talk. Sit down and find out exactly what happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic. So the description of once I put a drink in my body, I break out in craving. I have a normal reaction to alcohol, and once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. My life is unmanageable, which is the greater part of this illness. And he's in serious condition. Most of us are before we get here. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family, for whom he had deep affection. I could have all the affection in the world for another human being, and I didn't want to harm the people that I did, but I had no power, no choice, no control. So, and the spiritual principle in that paragraph there on page 112 is, show me you have confidence. If I'm working with another person, I am full of confidence that this program works because my experience tells me so. God bless you, RJ. See, you don't think I'm paying attention. I'm watching you too. So, but show him that you have confidence. There's callbacks in the book about confidence on page 17, 75. I'm not going to go to those things today because we're a little bit running on time. But in the last sentence there, thus you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. So I get to share with my experience with what alcohol does to me and what it does to me when I'm not drinking. I'm worse when I'm not drinking without a spiritual experience. Go, David.
Thanks. Yeah, again, I think this is another example here where Bill's just calling back to some concepts and some instructions that he's already introduced, where David took us there. And, this sense that, read this book, or as David talked about it, study, or at least the chapter on alcoholism. If we call back to page 94, it talks about lending the newcomer our book. I think you ought to know the subject better, right? As everyone should have a clear understanding of the risk he takes if he drinks too much. And this is all a reference back to pages really 94 and 95. Show me have confidence in his power to stop or moderate. Sort of an interesting use of the word power there by Bill.
Hmm.
The book is occasionally not without paradoxes or little mistakes here and there, unless this is just sort of a psychological instruction, you know. And say that you don't want to be a wet blanket, you only want him to take care of his health. A little bit of, again, here, sort of an end around to try to convince us to look into getting the help we might need. But the key of all of this sort of psychology, these tactics that Bill's laying out here is summed up in the final statement. The whole purpose of this is that thus you may succeed in interesting him in alcoholism. And again, it's really all parallel back to everything that we just read in the last chapter, right? So whether again, we as the recovered alcoholic or as the spouse trying to help, it's all the same approach. It's all the same tactics. It's all the same perspective. And the big thing they tell us, Bill says repeatedly, is use this book, use this instruction manual, this textbook as the means to approach, right? Hey, let's read this. Hey, you should look at it. You should understand a little better. Let's read it together. Let's start from the beginning and let's get to this point so that we all become educated on your situation and if you want to do something about it, right? Because we're not to, the spouses are not to nag or tell us that we have to get better. Closing thoughts? Nope. Okay. We'll stop the recording.
Okay.